Do you always look this serious? Or are you just trying to impress everyone, bad boy? Those were the words that made the entire room fall silent, because the man sitting across from Amelia Rose Carter was not just another stranger at the winter celebration. He was the Alpha King of Mooncrest, the most respected and untouchable figure in the kingdom. But Amelia did not know that. She only saw a lonely man sitting beneath the golden lights of the royal gathering, watching everyone around him as if he were standing in a world that never truly belonged to him. The winter festival had filled the streets of Mooncrest with music, warm lanterns, and the scent of fresh pastries drifting through the cold night air. Amelia had spent the entire evening helping at the small royal tavern near the palace gates. As an Omega, she was used to being overlooked. People often noticed her kindness, but they rarely noticed her dreams, her thoughts, or the quiet strength she carried every day. That night was supposed to be simple. A few hours away from her responsibilities. A chance to laugh with friends and forget how carefully everyone in the kingdom measured their words around those with power. Then she noticed him. A tall man with dark hair, a calm expression, and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of countless decisions. Unlike everyone else at the celebration, he was not enjoying the attention surrounding him. He looked distant, almost as if the entire room was celebrating a world he could never truly enter. Amelia had always been curious about people who looked lonely in crowded places. After a little too much celebration and a little less caution than usual, she walked over with a playful smile. You know, for someone standing in the middle of a party, you look like you are planning the downfall of the entire room. The man looked at her in surprise. No one spoke to him that way. Not because they disliked him, but because they feared saying the wrong thing. Amelia noticed his silence and laughed softly. Relax. I am not judging you. I am just saying you look like the mysterious character everyone writes stories about. A small smile almost appeared on his face before he quickly hid it. And what kind of character would that be? He asked. Amelia tilted her head, studying him for a moment. Probably a bad boy who secretly cares more than he wants anyone to know. The words were innocent, but they carried a strange weight. The man stared at her, not with anger but with curiosity. For years, people had called him powerful, noble, and intimidating. They praised his crown. They respected his title. But no one looked at him and simply saw a person. Amelia did not know his position. She did not know his history. She did not know that the man in front of her was Alexander James Blackwood, the Alpha King of Mooncrest. She only knew that someone seemed alone, and she had never been good at ignoring someone who looked like they needed a little kindness. As the music continued around them, Alexander found himself listening to every word she said. The Omega who stood before him was completely unaware of the power he carried, and somehow that made her the most honest person he had met in years. That night, Amelia believed she had simply teased a quiet stranger at a royal celebration. She had no idea that one playful sentence would become the first moment the Alpha King finally felt seen. The next morning, Amelia Rose Carter woke up with a strange feeling that she could not explain. She remembered the mysterious man from the winter celebration, the quiet stranger who had listened to her playful comments without walking away. She remembered his calm eyes and the small moment when it seemed like he almost smiled. But she had no idea that the person she had casually teased was Alexander James Blackwood, the Alpha King of Mooncrest. To Amelia, he was simply a man who looked like he carried too many thoughts and not enough happiness. To the entire kingdom, he was the ruler everyone respected and carefully approached. Inside the royal palace, Alexander stood near the tall windows of his private study, looking over the snowy lands of Mooncrest. Advisors, nobles, and guards had spent years treating him with careful respect. Every conversation was measured. Every word was chosen. Everyone saw the crown before they saw the person. But his thoughts kept returning to one moment from the festival. A young Omega had looked directly at him and spoken as if he was not a king at all. She had not asked for favors. She had not tried to gain his attention. She had simply noticed that he seemed lonely. Alexander found that impossible to forget. He had spent years surrounded by people, yet very few had ever spoken to him with genuine honesty. Meanwhile, Amelia returned to her normal routine at the small tavern near the palace gates. She did not tell anyone about the stranger she had met. To her, it was just an unusual conversation during a celebration. She continued preparing drinks, helping customers and greeting familiar faces with the same warmth she always showed. But the people around her noticed something different. Amelia seemed more thoughtful than usual. She wondered about the man from the festival and hoped he had found a reason to smile after she left. Later that week, fate brought them together again. Amelia was carrying supplies through the palace courtyard when she saw the same dark-haired man walking toward her. This time he was dressed differently. His clothing was more refined, and the people around him immediately changed their behavior. They stepped aside. They lowered their voices. They showed the kind of respect usually reserved for someone important. Amelia stopped and looked around, confused by the sudden silence. Then she heard someone whisper his title. "The Alpha King has arrived." Her expression changed as she looked back at the man standing in front of her. Alexander watched her carefully, wondering what she would do now that she knew the truth. Would she become nervous? Would she apologize? Would she treat him differently like everyone else? Amelia slowly remembered every word she had said the night before. Her cheeks warmed with embarrassment, but instead of fear, she gave a small, honest smile. "So you were not just mysterious. You were actually the Alpha King." Alexander expected many reactions, but her simple response surprised him. She did not step away. She did not pretend she had never met him. She simply accepted the truth and remained the same person. "Does that change anything?" he asked quietly. Amelia thought for a moment before answering. "Not really. You still looked lonely yesterday." For a moment, the most powerful man in Mooncrest had no reply. Those words reached deeper than any compliment he had ever received. Because Amelia was not speaking to the crown. She was speaking to him. And Alexander realized that the Omega who accidentally challenged him at the festival might be the only person in the kingdom who truly saw him. After Amelia Rose Carter discovered that the quiet stranger from the winter celebration was actually Alexander James Blackwood, the Alpha King of Mooncrest, she expected the world around her to change. She thought the moment she learned the truth, everything would feel different. But somehow it did not. Alexander was still the same person who had listened to her without judgment, the same man who had seemed lost in a crowded room. The only difference was that now she understood why everyone else treated him differently. In the days that followed, Amelia tried to return to her ordinary life, but her unexpected meeting with the Alpha King had already changed something. She found herself thinking about the loneliness she had noticed behind his confident expression. She wondered how someone with so much power could appear as if he had nowhere to rest. Alexander, meanwhile, found himself searching for reasons to visit the palace courtyard where Amelia often worked. He told himself it was because he wanted to understand the Omega who had spoken to him so honestly. But deep inside he knew there was more to it. Amelia reminded him of a world beyond responsibility and expectations. When he was around her, he did not feel like a ruler carrying an entire kingdom on his shoulders. He felt like a person. One afternoon, Alexander found Amelia organizing supplies near the palace gardens. Instead of approaching her as a king, he simply asked, "Do you always speak to strangers that honestly?" Amelia looked up and smiled. "Only when they look like they need someone to remind them that they are human." Her answer surprised him. Most people tried to impress him. They carefully chose their words because they wanted something from him. Amelia was different. She did not even seem to realize how rare her honesty was. As they walked through the gardens, Alexander began asking about her life. Amelia told him about growing up near the borderlands, about helping neighbors, and about learning that kindness was something anyone could offer, regardless of status. She never described herself as special. She simply believed people deserved to be treated with respect. Alexander listened quietly. For years, he had been surrounded by people who admired his strength, but very few cared about the person behind it. Amelia was the first person in a long time who noticed the things others ignored. She noticed when he was tired. She noticed when he became quiet. She noticed the moments when the crown felt heavier than usual. But Amelia also began seeing something unexpected in Alexander. The Alpha King was not only a powerful leader. He was thoughtful, patient, and deeply committed to protecting his people. He remembered details about the kingdom that many rulers would overlook. He listened carefully before making decisions. He carried responsibility not because he wanted praise, but because he genuinely cared. Their conversations became something neither of them expected. A friendship slowly formed between an Omega who had never been impressed by titles, and an Alpha King who had almost forgotten what it felt like to be treated normally. However, not everyone in Mooncrest viewed their connection the same way. Some members of the royal court began noticing the king's interest in Amelia, and they questioned why an ordinary Omega had captured his attention. They believed someone beside the Alpha King should come from a powerful family with influence and status. Amelia heard the whispers but refused to let them change her. She had spent her life knowing that people often judged what they did not understand. Alexander noticed her quiet strength and admired it more than any royal achievement. For the first time, he wondered if the person who challenged him with a simple joke at a winter festival might also be the person who could help him find peace. The connection between Amelia Rose Carter and Alexander James Blackwood continued to grow in the quiet moments that happened away from the attention of the royal court. While the kingdom saw the Alpha King as a symbol of strength and authority, Amelia continued to see the person behind the crown. She noticed the small things others ignored. She noticed when Alexander stayed awake late reviewing reports, when he carried worries he never spoke about, and when he stood alone in the palace halls despite being surrounded by countless people. For Alexander, those moments with Amelia became something he never expected. He had spent years believing that being a strong leader meant carrying every burden alone. But Amelia showed him that allowing someone to understand him was not weakness. It was a different kind of courage. One evening, Alexander invited Amelia to walk through the royal gardens after sunset. The winter air was cold, and the lights from the palace reflected across the snow-covered paths. Amelia looked around with curiosity, still amazed that a place so beautiful could belong to the same man who once seemed so distant at the festival. "Do you ever get tired of everyone seeing you as the Alpha King?" she asked. Alexander stopped for a moment. It was not a question people usually asked him. Most people wanted to know about his decisions, his power, or the future of the kingdom. Very few asked about him. "Sometimes," he admitted quietly, "sometimes I wonder if anyone would know who I am if I did not have this title." Amelia looked at him with a thoughtful expression. "I think they would. They just have to look closer." Those simple words stayed with Alexander. Amelia did not realize how much meaning they carried, but to him, they felt different from every formal speech and every respectful greeting he had received. She was reminding him that his worth existed beyond his position. Meanwhile, Amelia began to understand the challenges that came with standing near the Alpha King. She saw how many expectations surrounded him. Every decision affected thousands of people. Every choice was examined by those who wanted the kingdom to remain unchanged. She admired his dedication, but she also noticed how rarely anyone offered him support. The more time they spent together, the more obvious their differences became. Amelia came from a simple life where people valued honesty and compassion. Alexander came from a world where every action carried political meaning. Yet somehow those differences brought them closer instead of pushing them apart. However, the royal court began growing uncomfortable with their relationship. Some nobles believed Amelia was not suitable to stand beside the Alpha King. They whispered that she lacked experience, status, and influence. They could not understand why Alexander valued the opinion of an Omega from the borderlands. Amelia heard those doubts but refused to let them define her. She had faced judgment before, and she knew that proving herself did not require becoming someone else. Alexander noticed her strength. He admired that she did not seek approval from those who underestimated her. One day, during a royal gathering, a council member questioned why the Alpha King trusted Amelia's perspective. The room became quiet as everyone waited for Alexander's response. Instead of giving a simple answer, Alexander looked toward Amelia and said, "Because she sees what others fail to notice." The word surprised everyone, including Amelia. In that moment, she realized Alexander was not protecting her because she was fragile. He respected her because he recognized her strength. And Alexander realized something even more important. The Omega who once called him a bad boy without knowing his identity had become the person who reminded him what kind of king he truly wanted to be. The days following Alexander James Blackwood's public defense of Amelia Rose Carter changed the way many people in Mooncrest viewed the young Omega. Some still questioned her place beside the Alpha King, but others began noticing what Alexander had seen from the beginning. Amelia was not trying to gain power. She was not searching for a higher position. She simply continued being the same person who had once spoken to a lonely stranger at a winter celebration without knowing his name or title. Inside the palace, Amelia slowly learned the rhythm of royal life. The grand halls, formal gatherings, and endless traditions were very different from the quiet borderlands where she had grown up. At times, she felt like she had stepped into a world designed for someone else. She knew many people expected her to change, to become more distant or more careful with every word. But Amelia refused to lose the part of herself that had brought her there. Alexander noticed that more than anyone. He watched how she greeted the palace workers, how she thanked those who helped her, and how she treated everyone with the same respect regardless of their position. To him, those actions showed a type of strength that could never be measured by status. One afternoon, Alexander invited Amelia to visit the royal archives, a place where generations of Mooncrest history were preserved. He wanted to show her the stories of the kingdom, but he also wanted her to understand the responsibilities behind the crown. As they walked between the ancient shelves, Amelia asked, "Does everyone who becomes king have to give up being themselves?" Alexander looked at the old books around them before answering. "Sometimes it feels that way." Amelia looked at him carefully. "Then maybe someone needs to remind you that you are more than a crown." Alexander smiled because once again, she had said something no advisor would ever dare to say. She did not speak to challenge him. She spoke because she cared. Their growing connection did not go unnoticed. The royal court continued watching closely, especially those who believed tradition was more important than change. They believed the Alpha King should choose someone from a powerful family who could strengthen political alliances. To them, Amelia represented uncertainty, but Alexander saw something different. He saw someone who brought balance to a life that had become too focused on duty. One evening, Amelia overheard a conversation between several nobles discussing her future. They questioned whether she truly belonged in the palace, and whether an Omega from a simple background could understand the expectations surrounding the Alpha King. For a moment, the old doubts she had carried throughout her life returned. She remembered every time people underestimated her because she came from a small village. But before those thoughts could grow stronger, Alexander found her in the garden. He immediately noticed that something was wrong. "You do not have to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it," he told her. Amelia looked at him quietly. "What if they are right? What if I do not belong here?" Alexander stepped closer, his expression calm and sincere. "You were the only person who treated me like a person when everyone else saw only a king. That is exactly why you belong here." His words reminded Amelia of the first night they met. She had not known his identity. She had not cared about his power. She had simply noticed someone who seemed alone. And now, standing beside the Alpha King, she realized that perhaps the greatest difference between them was not their worlds. It was that both of them had spent years feeling unseen. Together, they were beginning to understand what it meant to finally be recognized for who they truly were. As the weeks passed in Mooncrest, the bond between Amelia Rose Carter and Alexander James Blackwood became impossible for the kingdom to ignore. What started as an unexpected conversation between a curious Omega and a distant stranger had slowly become something that changed the atmosphere of the entire palace. Alexander had always believed that being an Alpha King meant making decisions alone. He had been taught that a ruler needed to remain strong, controlled, and impossible to shake. But Amelia showed him a different kind of strength. She reminded him that listening was not a weakness, and that compassion could be just as powerful as authority. However, the closer they became, the more pressure surrounded them. The royal council believed Alexander needed to consider the future of Mooncrest carefully. They presented him with suggestions based on tradition, alliances, and influence. They wanted a choice that would benefit the kingdom politically. But every time Alexander heard those arguments, he remembered the first night Amelia spoke to him. She had not known his title. She had not cared about his position. She had simply looked at him and noticed that he seemed alone. That memory meant more to him than any carefully arranged royal agreement. Amelia, meanwhile, struggled with her own doubts. She knew Alexander respected her, but she also understood the distance between their worlds. He was the Alpha King. She was an Omega who had lived a simple life near the borderlands. There were moments when she wondered if she was only a temporary part of his life, a person who reminded him of a different world before duty called him back. One evening, while walking through the quiet palace gardens, Alexander found Amelia sitting beside the frozen fountain. He immediately noticed the thoughtful expression on her face. "You have been quiet today," he said gently. Amelia looked toward the stars before answering. "Sometimes I wonder if I belong here." Alexander sat beside her, not as a king, but as the man she had met at the winter celebration. "Why would you think that?" he asked. Amelia smiled sadly. "Because everyone here sees what I am not. They see where I came from. They see that I am an Omega without a powerful family or royal history." Alexander listened carefully. He understood those fears because he had spent his entire life being judged by expectations placed upon him. "Amelia," he said, "the people who matter do not measure you by where you started. They see what you bring." His words reminded her that her value had never depended on approval from others. She had helped him before knowing who he was, and now he wanted her to understand that she was valued for the same reason. As their conversation continued, Alexander revealed something he had never shared with many people. He admitted that the crown often felt heavier than anyone realized. The kingdom saw a powerful alpha king, but few people understood the person carrying that responsibility. Amelia listened quietly, just as she had on the night they first met. She did not try to fix everything. She simply stayed beside him. That simple act meant more than any grand promise. The next day, Alexander made a decision that surprised the royal court. Instead of hiding his connection with Amelia to satisfy old traditions, he openly acknowledged the importance of the person who had changed his perspective. He did not choose her because she was different. He chose to respect her because she had always been true to herself. For Amelia, that moment proved something she had slowly begun to understand. She was not standing beside the Alpha King because she had become someone else. She was there because the person she had always been was enough. The days after Alexander James Blackwood openly acknowledged Amelia Rose Carter's importance to him brought a quiet change throughout Mooncrest. There was no sudden transformation of the kingdom, no single moment where every doubt disappeared. Instead, the change came through small moments that people could not ignore. They saw the Alpha King listening more carefully during meetings. They saw him considering different perspectives before making decisions. They saw that the Omega who had entered the palace from the borderlands had not weakened their ruler. Somehow, she had helped him become more connected to the people he served. Amelia never expected recognition. She never asked anyone to accept her. She continued moving through the palace with the same kindness she had always shown. She greeted the workers, thanked the guards, and treated everyone with respect regardless of their position. To her, nothing had changed. But to many people in Mooncrest, everything had changed. They were beginning to understand why Alexander valued her presence. One morning, Amelia joined Alexander during a visit to the outer villages of the kingdom. She expected to stay quietly beside him, observing how a king interacted with his people. Instead, she watched something that surprised her. Alexander remembered the names of families he had met years before. He asked about their concerns and listened carefully to their answers. He was not simply a ruler sitting above his kingdom. He was someone who genuinely cared about the lives of those he protected. Amelia smiled as she watched him. She finally understood that the man she had met at the winter celebration had never been cold or distant. He had simply carried responsibilities that few people could understand. Alexander noticed her expression and asked, "What are you thinking about?" Amelia replied honestly, "I think everyone sees the king first. They forget there is a person standing behind the title." Alexander became quiet because those words had followed him from the very beginning of their story. Amelia had always seen what others overlooked. Later that evening, they returned to the palace and walked through the gardens beneath the moonlight. Alexander told her that before meeting her, he believed loneliness was simply part of leadership. He thought a king had to accept distance from everyone around him. But Amelia had changed that belief. "You made me remember that trust is not something a ruler gives orders for. It is something people choose to offer," he said. Amelia looked at him and smiled. "Maybe people trust you because you were always worthy of it. You just forgot to see yourself that way." For Alexander, those words carried more meaning than any formal praise from the royal court. Meanwhile, some members of the council slowly began to change their opinions about Amelia. They noticed that she never used her connection with the Alpha King for personal advantage. She never demanded special treatment. She never tried to become someone she was not. Her influence came from sincerity, not ambition. The same qualities that made some people doubt her became the reasons others began to respect her. However, Amelia still wondered about the future. She knew that standing beside Alexander meant facing challenges she had never imagined. The world of royalty would always be different from the simple life she once knew. But she also realized something important. She had never needed to belong to the palace to have value. She had brought her own worth with her. Alexander had not chosen her because she completed his image as a king. He valued her because she reminded him of the person he wanted to be. And as Mooncrest slowly accepted the bond between them, the Alpha King and the Omega, who once met as strangers, discovered that their greatest strength came from understanding each other. As the bond between Alexander James Blackwood and Amelia Rose Carter became stronger, the people of Mooncrest began to witness a different side of their Alpha King. The ruler they once saw as distant and impossible to approach slowly became someone they understood. It was not because Alexander changed who he was. It was because Amelia reminded him that showing compassion did not make him less powerful. It made him a better leader. Amelia continued adjusting to life inside the palace, but she never allowed the royal world to erase the person she had always been. She still walked through the gardens with curiosity, still asked questions others were afraid to ask, and still treated every person around her with the same kindness. Alexander admired that more than anything. In a world where many people changed their behavior depending on who stood before them, Amelia remained genuine. One afternoon, Alexander invited Amelia to attend a royal gathering where leaders from different regions of Mooncrest had gathered to discuss the future of the kingdom. Amelia felt uncertain at first. She had never been comfortable being the center of attention. She knew some people still questioned why an Omega from the borderlands had such a close connection with the Alpha King. But Alexander reminded her that he did not want her to pretend to be someone else. "The reason I trust you is because you never tried to become what others expected," he told her. Those words gave Amelia the confidence to enter the hall without hiding who she was. During the gathering, several leaders shared their concerns about the challenges facing Mooncrest. They expected Alexander to make every decision alone, as previous rulers had done. But instead, he invited different perspectives and asked Amelia what she noticed. First, some people were surprised. They could not understand why the Alpha King valued the thoughts of someone without a royal background. Then Amelia spoke. She did not speak with authority or demand attention. She simply shared what she had learned from living among ordinary people. She explained that many problems could only be understood by listening to those directly affected. The room became quiet as people considered her words. Alexander watched with pride because he knew exactly what others were beginning to discover. Amelia's strength was not found in a title. It came from her ability to understand people. Later that evening, Alexander and Amelia walked through the palace gardens again. The same paths that once represented a world divided by status now felt like a place where they could simply be themselves. Alexander admitted that he had once believed his role as Alpha King required him to keep everyone at a distance. Amelia smiled and asked, "And do you still believe that?" He looked at her and shook his head. "No. I believe a king can be stronger when he does not have to stand alone." Amelia realized how much he had changed since the night they first met. The man who once appeared untouchable had learned to trust. The king who carried every burden alone had finally allowed someone to stand beside him. However, their journey was not finished. A kingdom could change slowly, but old beliefs did not disappear overnight. Some people still struggled to accept a future where an Omega could influence the Alpha King. Amelia knew challenges would remain, but she also knew something important. She had never been afraid of being underestimated. Her entire life had taught her that true value was not determined by the opinions of others. And Alexander had learned the same lesson. The person who changed his world was not someone who sought power. She was someone who saw his heart before she ever saw his crown. The journey that began with a simple conversation at a winter celebration had transformed the entire future of Mooncrest. Amelia Rose Carter still remembered the night she looked at a quiet stranger and called him a bad boy without knowing she was speaking to the Alpha King. At that moment, She had no idea that a few honest words could reach someone who had spent years surrounded by respect but rarely experienced genuine understanding. Now, standing beside Alexander James Blackwood, she finally understood the true meaning behind their unexpected connection. Alexander remained the Alpha King of Mooncrest, a leader trusted by his people and respected throughout the kingdom. But he was no longer the man who believed he had to carry every responsibility alone. Amelia had shown him that strength was not about hiding every emotion or standing above everyone else. True strength came from knowing when to listen, when to trust, and when to allow others to stand beside him. The people of Mooncrest slowly embraced this new chapter. They saw how Amelia's presence brought warmth to the palace, and how Alexander became more connected with the people he served. She never tried to replace tradition. She never demanded recognition. She simply continued being the person she had always been, the Omega who once helped a stranger because she believed every person deserved kindness. Over time, even those who once doubted her began to understand why Alexander valued her so deeply. They realized that the Alpha King had not chosen someone who wanted power. He had chosen someone who reminded him why power existed in the first place. One evening, Alexander and Amelia returned to the same palace garden where they had shared many quiet conversations. The snow had begun to disappear, and the first signs of spring appeared across Mooncrest. Alexander looked at the woman beside him, and remembered how different everything had been when they first met. "Do you remember the first thing you said to me?" he asked with a small smile. Amelia laughed softly. "I remember embarrassing myself in front of the most important person in the kingdom." Alexander shook his head. "You did something no one else had done." Amelia looked at him curiously. "What was that?" He answered honestly. "You saw me before you saw my crown." Those words carried the truth of everything they had experienced together. Their bond was never created by status, expectation, or power. It began because one person chose kindness when it was easier to walk away. Amelia had never planned to change the Alpha King's life. She had simply followed the values she believed in. But sometimes the smallest choices create the greatest changes. The Omega who came from the borderlands had helped transform a kingdom by reminding its ruler that compassion was not a weakness. It was a foundation for true leadership. And the Alpha King, who once believed he had to face everything alone, discovered that the greatest treasure was not found in a throne or a title. It was found in having someone who knew his heart before knowing his name. As Mooncrest entered a new era, the story of Alexander and Amelia became a reminder throughout the kingdom. A person's worth was never decided by where they came from, what they possessed, or what others expected them to become. Sometimes destiny arrived in the most unexpected way. Sometimes the person who changed everything was the one who simply chose to see you for who you truly were.